Historically, content has fallen into the marketing department, but content is no longer just a marketing responsibility. The sales team, the customer success and account management team can be creating content. We need to be thinking about this as a unified team.
Where and how do you source your content ideas?
By getting all of those insights from current customers that I work with, I'm able to then reflect back the patterns to the market.
One of the best ways to compete is to be the brand that people already think about and already know prior to them being in market for that solution.
It doesn't matter how good your content is. When your customer acquisition cost is high, your growth rate isn't where you want it to be, the number one thing is deletion or reduction. Adding a podcast in that might deliver 500K or $1 million in pipeline in the first 6 months, if you do it well, is not going to offset you wasting $6 million a year on this program that doesn't work or deliver ROI.
Specifically with the organic, like all of it works. It is 100% proven. But the problem is, and the question is like, how long will it take to work for you? It's not predictable. And a lot of it depends on how well you execute it, how long you do it for, what resources you put on it.
The number one way you build brand is by
Welcome, everybody. Welcome. So this is actually the second live session that we're doing with Chris. We're going to do these monthly. Really excited to have everybody here. I actually think some people here were on the first one. And the whole purpose of today's session is to kind of do a Q&A style, AMA style, and literally get as specific and helpful as possible in answering any of your questions. Related to content strategy, content execution, social strategy, podcasting, YouTube, anything at all that can be helpful for you. That's the entire purpose of, today's session. And just for a little bit of context, I'm sure like everybody's, very familiar with Chris and Chris's content, probably where most of you all came from. But yeah, I'm Erik Jacobson. I'm the founder and CEO of Hatch. We run all of Chris's, video and podcast production. And we do that for a lot of other B2B companies. We've been doing it about 4 years. And so we've got a lot of data and experience on what's working specifically with long form and short form video. And the distribution of that on social and YouTube and podcast platforms and things like that. So we can go really deep on any of those topics. And then, of course, Chris, has been executing at I would say, world-class level for the last 5 years on LinkedIn, on podcasts, and also distributing that on YouTube. So we can go through anything at all that would be helpful for you with your business, whether you're the founder or CEO of it or, on the marketing team. And how you can scale up a content engine or any content strategies that will be helpful. So I think to start, what I'll do is, Chris, I'll open it up to you to just, share any other context you'd like, but I can set, off the entire session here with maybe a question or two that Chris and I can riff on. And in the meantime, if you want to just put your questions in the chat, and then we can just call you up to ask your question once you've done that. So yeah, before I jump in, I can kind of get started here with a question or two, Chris. But yeah, any other context you wanted to share about your background and how you just feel about content in general?
There's been something I've been thinking about recently as I consult with companies, a lot of times with like a chief revenue officer and other executives, is that historically, content has fallen into the marketing department. And I believe that marketing should be responsible for developing some level of content, whether that's feeding an SEO strategy, long form production, whatever your particular marketing strategy is. But I want to make a point that content is no longer just a marketing project. It's no longer a marketing responsibility. The sales team can be creating content. The customer success and account management team can be creating content around the success of the customers. The same thing I feel about an event strategy is that events, while it comes out of the marketing budget and marketing organizes them, they a lot of times have a sales objective. They a lot of times have a renewal and expansion objective inside of those events. And so I feel like we need to be thinking about this as a unified team, and as other departments in the company that contribute to the go-to-market, to develop this competency of being able to communicate with your target customer, with your existing customers, using online channels and digital content that can reach them at all times. And so I feel like that's a point that I'm trying to make right now as I consult, because a lot of people still just push it to the marketing department, but there's so many opportunities for other departments to contribute as well. And the ability to create content, like when it was a marketing responsibility 10 years ago, you had to use InDesign and make it into a pretty PDF. And there was marketing skills and design that were needed. At this point, it's very simple to create good looking content and good production quality content across the internet for someone that is a sales leader or anyone else. You can take your iPhone and make a video. You can do a tweet and screenshot it. There's so many ways to communicate a message that do not require technical design skills anymore. And so I'm pushing the message to go-to-market teams to be able to take this on as well.
It's such a good point, and it actually will just compound the effectiveness of each of those roles that you described. Like, for example, the SDR, traditionally going one-to-one for the most part outbound, whereas now, like, if that person were still doing the same exact playbook but now layering on an organic content strategy on top of it, it can make the efficiency of that person 5x, 10x, 15x, 20x, because it's more of the one-to-many play. So yeah, I love that point. And maybe on that, where and how do you source, like, especially for those getting started, your content ideas, and like the frameworks you have for what types of content, like the buckets that you like to publish, whether that, I mean, we can categorize them a bunch of different ways: top of funnel, mid funnel, bottom of funnel style content. But like the volume of content you've published over the last 5 years and the consistency of it, like, I'm curious what your process is for generating the ideas of what that content should be, and then what buckets those break down to, in terms of, like, you try to have certain types of content, whether it be podcast episodes and posts and things like that, to achieve certain goals.
So I think I fall into a unique position on this answer because I actively consult with lots of companies. And so I can quickly see the patterns of the problems that they express, or the metrics that they have, or the solutions that they try that didn't work, and then the patterns of that experience. And so by getting all of those insights from current customers that I work with, I'm able to then reflect back the patterns to the market, saying, we've seen this at 7 companies in a row. Here's the data. Most likely, if you're like these companies, it's probably happening to you too. And so there's a level of pattern recognition that you get from actively working and helping your target customer in real life. That could involve, I think that customer success and account management become a really strong place to get those types of insights. And right now, they put them in a document and ship them to marketing. It sits in a backlog and never gets created. And so just taking the ability to just go and say, we've seen this with 7 customers. Let's figure out a way to get this written up in a place where we can help our customers and cut out the middleman of passing the baton to somebody else. There's an ability of just sourcing it from your target customer, which basically inversely reflects your value proposition. You can quickly identify the problems that your customers have, what they're trying to solve, how the solution helped them, what was the overall impact, and then be able to communicate that in a way to the rest of the market. Another way to get it is to then express those ideas inside of your content and collect feedback. So on a live event like this, getting questions, we ask questions, we talk about things. Some of the things hit, some of the things don't. And you're able to use that feedback to then consistently iterate on the message, figure out the things that work. And then once you're able to nail that down, you basically have messages around the problem, the top level problem that you're trying to solve, ideally attached with numbers, examples, quotations, and things like that, deep things. And the reason that helps is because people can, when you say, we just analyzed a company, they spent $14.2 million a year on Google ads and their CAC payback was 62 months calculated. People can go and feel that. They say, oh, our CAC payback is 47 months. We spend a lot of money on Google ads. Let's go look at this. And so when you have the specificity and the specific numbers around it, it creates a lot of credibility, and it exacerbates the problem and the pain. And so you have elements around what the actual issues are. You have elements around the potential solutions. I think talking about things about what your customers try or what you hear people have tried that didn't work is a really interesting thing.
Mm.
And so an example of that, like I posted a little while ago, sales and marketing alignment has been an issue in B2B companies for more than 10 years. They've tried to solve it with hiring a chief revenue officer, firing their VP of sales, building a RevOps team to align the teams, um, firing their CMO and hiring a new person, whatever the companies try to do, none of that actually solved the problem. And when you are able to express that, here's what people were trying to solve. Here are the things that they tried. We know that they didn't work. Here is the actual problem. It gives people a sense because most people see all of these available options. They look at what everybody else is doing and say, oh, like, the chief revenue officer job title is growing so much. That's going to be the solution to sales and marketing alignment. And often it's not. The real solution is adjusting the data and the metrics inside of your company that aligns the teams around core KPIs. And so being able to communicate that message succinctly, here's the problem, here are things people tried, here's why they didn't work, here's a solution that will actually solve the problem. And then you have data around your actual solution that can be appropriate for paid distribution or reformatted to go out organically. And then you have social proof, which is another element of the problem. But then you have the actual outcomes. Here are what customers, here's the problem, here were their metrics, here's what they did, here were the outcomes. And giving people a clear roadmap of how your solution actually solved the issue. And so you're taking it, you basically have content across the stages, people that don't understand the problem. Many people, for the things that I market and sell, do not have a clear understanding or a clear scope of the problems. We have to frame it. We have to use numbers. We have to get people aware of it. Then you have all of the available solution sets, and you can talk through and compare the different solutions. Then you can talk specifically around your solution and then examples of the outcomes of the solution. I'm sure there's more to it, but that's like a high level framework in which to work from.
What do you think is a good breakdown of like prioritization of those different buckets?
It depends on where you're at in the maturity curve, right? So like right now for my company, 99% of companies don't know how to scope this problem. And so I'm spending a majority of my time talking about and evangelizing the problem, framing the problem, developing, the metrics and the data around helping people understand the problem. And most of my energy is going to that. And you'll see it in my LinkedIn comments. People are like, oh my gosh, Chris, you're talking about all the things that are going wrong, but what's the solution? And the reality is that there is not a clear solution to this very large problem yet. We understand the problem. We have an idea of the solution. We're helping customers. We're building toward it. And then for a later stage company, 100 million ARR, the product is developed. The category is mature. People understand the problem. You're going to spend a lot more time talking about your product, customer outcomes, and things that are down there. And so it really depends on where you are in the maturity curve of your category or market.
That makes a ton of sense. And yeah, for anybody who's joined a little bit late, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. Chris and I can start taking some questions here very shortly as we get a few more in there. What I think something you've done an incredible job of is championing narratives that are different than what has been the norm over the last, 5-10 years or what have you. So this kind of relates to those buckets a little bit, but like developing your points of view, category creation a little bit, how you go about that, the narrative, the overall top level narrative that you want to champion, all of that. Like you've championed in a massive way, dark social, demand creation, demand capture versus like the old lead gen model, and revenue R&D, like, these very, I would say, unique points of view and frameworks. Do you have like any thoughts around how important or not important that is in relation to like a social and content strategy in general?
Here's the black and white reality. If you are a founder or if you work in a company and you go and you deeply understand your market and your customers, inevitably you will come up with a different point of view than anyone else in your market. What happens, though, is that most companies look at what their competitors do and then follow their competitors as if the competitors have done all the work and know what they're doing when they usually don't. And so it's the process in how you develop the point of view and how you're getting there that is the important thing. We cannot be listening purely to Gartner and what our Gartner tells us to do and how to message and what our competitors are doing. And these types of details, we need to be able to spend a bunch of time inside of our market understanding and quantifying the problem, which then bubbles up to a differentiated point of view on the problem and the solution. And so I think that's really the unlock here. I just observe lots of companies that do not take the time to really do that. And what happens is you end up in a category with 4 companies with a vanilla message where no one can tell the differences between you or anybody else. And then all that comes down to is who are the companies that have the largest market share, who are the companies that have the most reputation and word of mouth, and those end up being the top vendors. So if you are a smaller vendor competing with large vendors, inevitably you're at a disadvantage by just copying their message or following along with what they're doing. You'll get market share. You're just at a disadvantage.
Why do you think that there's companies that fall into that trap or that situation?
Because 10 years ago, market research was incredibly expensive. It took a really long time. It was hard to rely on it. And you usually had to fly around the country and talk to people because you didn't have the data to send out a survey to 500 people. And so 10 years ago, market research was incredibly expensive, cost prohibitive. By the time you got the insights back, you've spent $50,000 and it's taken 6 months. And what's the value in the data when it's already 6 months delayed? And so executives that operated in that time and haven't recognized how much the world has changed and how easy it is to access this feedback from customers still operate in that old world where we have to get our insights from analyst firms because the analyst firms are out there talking to our customer and they have the best insights for us, but they're also giving that exact same advice to the 5 other companies that we compete with. Or we need to be looking and spending competitive analysis with what all our competitors are doing, because 10 years ago, it was a lot more difficult to understand what all our competitors were doing, what their strategy was to make sure that we were able to feature match and we were able to compete in an RFP. And now we can just go and look at their website or look at their content and see what our competitors are doing overnight. And so I think that it's just about recognizing how easy it is today, how cost effective it is today to be able to reach and understand our target market in a way that wasn't possible just 5 or 10 years ago. I know because I did market research in 2012 to 2015. We had to hire a firm. They had to go out and buy a bunch of data. We spent money on the data. Then we had to do the survey. Then we analyzed the survey. Then we realized we didn't ask enough questions or have a big enough sample. We had to go back and do it. And all of a sudden, it's super expensive. Companies has spent $100,000 out of their $2.5 million budget on market research, hasn't seen any return on it. So they're like, market research isn't for us. And it's not expensive and it's not slow anymore.
Yeah. And one massive thing that's also, I think, added to that problem over the last 10 years is simply the number of competitors. I mean, the ability to create software today is easier than it's ever been, costs less than it ever has, all of those things. And so you can get even more easily bucketed or grouped into the sea of sameness than ever before. So developing those points of view, differentiation, which probably also stems into the product itself. But to your point, the source foundation of that is all based on customer insights, customer feedback, and then your layer of opinion and expertise on top of that to drive, the narrative.
Just to be clear.
Yep.
Any market that has 70, 80, 90+% gross margins will inevitably attract a lot of competition and reduce the profitability in the category. You can look back to 2005 and look in B2C categories like running shoes and things like that. There were not a lot of companies. You were locked through distribution through Foot Locker or whatever stores were distributing the shoes because you didn't have an e-commerce play. The barriers to entry were so much higher back then in a lot of B2C things, purely based on how you get to the customer in a physical distribution. And then if you look 10 years later, there are tons of small upstarts that create running shoes and all these different things like that, sell primarily e-commerce. There's way more competition. They have lower costs because they're not paying 40% margin to some store. So now they have a more competitive price. They have a better distribution channel, and it becomes a lot more competitive, and then margins degrade and things like that. That stuff is coming to software and tech, unless you're in regulated industries where the barriers to entry are created around laws. But if you're not in places like that where you have restrictions and registrations and clearances and things like that restrict, it makes it a lot harder and more expensive for enters to enter, which doesn't happen much in software. That's coming. It's way easier to create software now than it was 10 years ago. People can look at what you have, build 80% of the features in your product that you've been building for 7 years, and price it for 10% of the cost and completely come and undercut you. And that is a strategy that a lot of people are taking right now as a land grab strategy. It's happening against intent data and contact level data right now. There's other places where it's happening too, just because the cost to develop the software is so much lower, especially with the augmentation of AI and things like that. And that there are large markets that have already been developed that people can come in and sell their pair of running shoes that are arguably just as good for $100 instead of $200 and start taking market share. And so, yeah, I do think that competition and the commoditization of software does have an influence on this.
And one of the best ways to compete in that environment is to be the brand that people already think about and already know prior to them being in market for that solution. And obviously, the topic of today is all based around content being one of the best ways to do that. Because if you're competing against 100 other companies who are willing to be in a race to the bottom on pricing and feature parity and, basically just trying to undercut you, and it's essentially the same, like your H1 on your website basically is a carbon copy of 20 other vendors, and everybody's finding you all through Google. It's harder to delineate who you should choose and why you should choose them. But the entire goal of all of this stuff that we're talking about today, and we can get real tactical here now, is like, how are you on that number 1, number 2, number 3 shortlist spot prior to them ever being in market, which is the vast majority of all buyers. And that's something that you've championed for a long time. This exact demand creation, versus demand capture breakdown. So we've got a few questions.
Let me just answer that real quick.
Yeah.
I think that it actually comes down to this order. Most people think content is the way that you build brand. I actually disagree. Have the best differentiated product that solves a specific problem for your customer is number one. It doesn't matter how good your content is. If people are going to ask, have you used this company before? And people in the shadows are saying, yeah, I tried it. The product didn't work. It doesn't matter how good your content is. Number one, build the best product with a differentiated solution that matches what you hear directly from your customers. Number two, that goes with that, have a differentiated point of view on the problem and the solution and why your solution has a better result or a different result than the other available solutions that people have. And then number three, put out great content. And so I see a lot of people perpetuating the idea that marketing should be all about brand, but the number one way you build brand is by delivering an exceptional product and an exceptional experience that delivers on the promise that you make to your customer. And so I want to underscore that point that becomes the number one. If your product is the 7th product in the category and it sucks and you're losing deals because you don't have all these features and things like that, then starting a podcast to build brand might not be the solution. It would be going to understand customers and building a better differentiated product or focusing on a niche that's underserved. Building brand through content is not the solution for everybody, depending on their stage and where they're at and what the core business problems are.
Spot on. And especially as like a content creation and production company, like it's too self-serving to say content creation solves all these problems. It's simply not true. So yeah, totally agree. Again, if anybody has questions for Chris, specifically for your situation or for myself, please drop them in the chat. We can answer those async if you're not willing to, come on live, or feel free to jump on live and we can pull you on. On that note, I would actually say, like, what are the other scenarios you think? One thing I've heard you talk about is if you're not hitting your plan, like already, then be careful about standing up an organic, content creation strategy. I was thinking like we could go a little bit deeper on that. So that's a perfect segue from the last point, which is like step one, we need to create a differentiated product and differentiated point of view on the problem. So let's assume those two are solved. Are there any other prerequisites you think are important to have before you start an organic content creation, strategy as like a company and a marketing strategy, social, podcast, YouTube, what have you? And yeah, I've heard you mention that before in terms of like, we need to hit the plan first. That then allows for some of the breathing room to then go, stand this up and execute it in a really intentional way. But yeah, what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, let's just use a real example. So $80 million SaaS company, they planned this year to grow at 30%. Now, after they reforecast for H2, it looks like they're going to land at 19%, which means that they're going to come 67% to plan, more or less. They're 80 million ARR, so that means that they have a bunch of customers. People are willing to pay for it. People stay for the product. Their NRR is greater than 100%. The issue of product market fit is out the window. They're past that stage, and that's why I use this example. And so with this company, they're only growing at 19%, which means, and they planned on 30, which means that their customer acquisition cost is inflated because they're not getting as much customers and they're spending the same amount of money. And when you look at the marketing budget, they spend $15 million a year on marketing, and that maybe they create SEO content. They do a couple of like reports every year, and they have that going. But then over here, they spend $1 million a year on connected TV. They spend $6 million a year on events, and they spend $2 million a year on Google ads, and they have all this stuff going. And they're only growing at 19%, which means that their marketing is not delivering enough pipeline in order to hit the goals for the company. And so when you have this whole situation, and then some people would think, okay, let's keep all the things that we're doing right now, and let's just add a podcast on top of it. There is such a value, especially in this economy, in this situation, in deletion, in saying we've done this for 18 months, and we are cutting it. You cut the reporting, you cut the focus, you cut the budget. Maybe you have 4 people that run this program that doesn't work. You move on from those people, you lose a management layer. You all of a sudden have a lot of extra bandwidth, room, investment, money to go and do something else. And so when you're in this situation, your customer acquisition cost is high, your growth rate isn't where you want it to be. The number one thing is deletion or reduction. What are the things? If you look at all of the investments of the $15 million this company spends on marketing, and they're getting 50 cents on the dollar in revenue for every dollar they spend on marketing, then inside of that pie, there are some things that are literally delivering zero. And oftentimes, the things that are delivering zero or close to zero ROI are also the places where a majority of the money gets spent. Adding a podcast in that might deliver 500K or $1 million in pipeline in the first 6 months, if you do it well, it varies by company, is not going to offset you wasting $6 million a year on this program that doesn't work or deliver ROI. And so deletion first, and then you have programs that are you basically have the amount of spend that we spend on marketing is delivering an appropriate ROI against the goals and the company targets. Then we are hitting the goal, and we put a podcast on top of it as an accelerant. And the reason for that is because if you start one of these things, like let's say that company started it right now, we're going to keep all the things that we're doing and we're going to start a podcast. Their CAC's already out of whack. They're already behind their plan. Their sales cycles are 120 days, so there's no way they're going to make up for it in the rest of the back half of the last 6 months. And then they start the podcast, and then 3 months later, instead of they're targeting 19% now, or that's their forecast, now they're down to 17%. They're going to say things are going wrong. We need to cut out this podcast, and we need to focus on things that work or drive faster, measurable ROI. And then all of a sudden, you just wasted 3 months spinning your wheels doing something that was going to fail no matter what. And so being able to set up this strategy in a way where your existing investments are already paying off at an appropriate ROI, you have a clear sense about measuring them, you're achieving company goals, then adding this on is the only real way to give it a fair shot, especially even at any stage, at early stage or in mid-late stage. And so that's the rationale as to why to start it when you're already hitting your plan, because most podcasts in a B2B environment will fail. Fail being a relative term, that a company will not continue to do it or accelerate investments or focus on it because of the perceived impact. most will fail by that definition. And the reason is twofold. One, most companies don't start it at the right time, or they think, oh, if we boot up a podcast, it's going to come and save the day for all the other stuff that we're doing that isn't working. They don't practice deletion. And then secondarily, they're not maximizing the actual impact of the podcast. The podcast is not just to post it on audio. It's to create micro videos for social that you get a lot of impact on. It's to collect insights from customers. It's to be able to use that video to then fuel an email strategy that isn't some bullshit automated nurture with a PDF that you created 3 years ago. It's from a content that you created last week about your customer problem. And it can fuel all of these different strategies if used appropriately. And so those are the reasons why a podcast fails.
Super smart. And I agree. Especially because, like, specifically with the organic, like all of it, organic social, podcast, YouTube, short form video, all of it works. Like, it is 100% proven. If it's worked for any company or any B2B creator or agency owners, solo founder, basically take any category of business, you can find many examples of it working. But the problem is, and the question is, like, how long will it take to work for you? It's not predictable. And a lot of it depends on how well you execute it, how long you do it for, what resources you put on it, all of those things. So to your point, the number one failure is usually a result of cutting it too soon, not executing it properly, not putting enough on it. And so without the deletion, you usually don't leave room to execute the thing correctly. And so, yeah, I completely agree with those points.
And then I just want to provide an example here on the on a personal brand standpoint, not practically attached to a company brand, that if you do it well, it goes with you forever.
Yep.
Forever. And so the example is that when I started my first company, Refine Labs, it took me 18 months to have 4 people on my team and more than $1 million ARR. And I was starting, I had 1,000 followers when I started. Now I started my new company, Passetto. We announced it at the end of January, which means we've been in business for a little over 5 months. And we have 4 people on the team and more than $1 million ARR in 5 months instead of 18 months, because I now have 157,000 followers and a lot of people that know me and trust me.
Yep.
And so it's not just about your current situation right now. If you play the cards out and you think about your career in a long-term view, that the impact is exponentially greater as you go on. And so for people that are serial entrepreneurs and know that they're working in one company, but they're going to try and sell it in 2 years and then flip that into a bigger venture or flip that into M&A or whatever, or, you know, venture investing or being an advisor and trying to take 2% equity on an exit or whatever you're trying to do, that your personal brand accelerates all of those financial upsides forever. And so that's a point that I want to make too, because I think people look at, oh, how can we create a podcast to hit our pipeline target next quarter? And there's a whole other element of how does this play out over my entire career?
100%. And that's true for you executing that for your personal brand. It's also true that over that period of time, the demand for content on these platforms and the amount of people consuming content on it is growing. So the opportunity is actually getting larger just naturally from the expansion of the audiences on the platforms as well. So you've got both of those working for you at the same time. Let's switch gears here. Let's bring a few people up. I see Sam's here. Sam Shepler, my buddy. He's got a good question about creating a demand gen and thought leadership strategy, related to a sales objection that you have and you get frequently. So Sam, if you want to hop on here and ask your question, we can jam on it.
Right on. Awesome. Just here in the gym. Don't mind me, but yeah, appreciate you guys doing this. Yeah, I guess so. We're an agency. We specialize in all things customer stories, video testimonials. We ran a survey of our customers, and one of the things we realized is, like, the alternative to working with us is doing it internally, right? Probably not, so different than Refine or Hatch, right? So I'm curious, how do you guys think about creating a demand gen and thought leadership strategy when the biggest, thing, well, there's really 2 things actually to overcome. Is one, like, we think we can do it internally. And then the other thing is, like, we know we have to do this. It's just like that fourth thing on a list that never gets done, right? Everyone knows they need video testimonials. No one thinks it's a bad idea, but like, no one measures it really. And also like it just kicks down the road. So yeah, I guess two-part question there. Increasing urgency, and then like getting that question, handling that objection around like, well, we think we can maybe do this internally.
Cool. Let's cover both of them. So, on the urgency side, I would focus on leveraging external thought leaders, interviewing them, and having them communicate the perspective of the impact and the priority of these programs rather than you doing it yourself. So I have an example. It's slightly different, but in 2017, we were trying to sell to emergency medicine physicians. They had a core belief that the thing that they use today was the thing that they should use, and that our product, because it was new and they didn't learn about it in college 25 years ago, that it wasn't acceptable to use in these situations. And so what I did is I went out and I interviewed the 5 different people that have either used the product in that way or did like long-term clinical studies on this that demonstrated that these are equivalent solutions, and then used that, clip the video of this person that we did an hour podcast, a 1 minute and 30-second video of him saying this, and then running it on a Facebook ad at that time or an email or something like that directly to all the people that I want to know, with the goal of them understanding that these two things are equivalent from somebody that they trust and know that they see speak at conferences and things like that. And so on the urgency side, you basically need to get the customer to understand it's an objection of this isn't my number one priority. You need to have people communicate that your customer trusts around why it should be a top priority and what the impact of it should be. When it comes to any type of company where you're doing a professional service, the main alternative is we'll just do this ourselves. And when you're selling software, the main alternative is I'll just keep doing it in a spreadsheet, or I'll keep copying the data from Salesforce into Google Sheets, and that'll be fine for me. So there's always a status quo situation, whether you're in professional services or not. But let's address this one directly. You have to be able to communicate a message and an offering that they cannot do themselves, either because you have an architecture and a framework that you've done over the past 200 companies that gives you the ability to deliver a customer testimonial in 3 days instead of 37 days. Or you could collect and try and estimate how long it takes for, like, I'll give you an example. I've been talking around the custom object in Salesforce. A company, like my company's worked on it, and then we have some other partners that are working on it too. We studied companies that have tried to do it themselves, and on average, it takes somewhere between 9 and 15 months to do it yourself with your internal RevOps team, and the project doesn't even get used when it's done. It never actually takes off and becomes the main way of reporting and collecting data. So you spend all this time and all this resource, and then you don't actually even use the fucking solution. And then we can deliver it in 90 days. And it gets used and it works, and then we support you. And that becomes a huge value proposition for acceleration of time to impact, and the confidence that what you're doing is actually going to hold and work. Another example, because people will talk about Passetto and say, oh, you're doing all these like nice metrics calculations. Like, my finance team can do that. My RevOps team is reporting on, pipeline creation. We're already doing this ourselves. And the thing that they can't replicate in-house is that we've done this with 60 companies just like them, and we have exact data and benchmarks around 37 metrics that matter to them about where they stack up and where the biggest opportunities are. And that becomes a core thing that they can't replicate in-house. So trying to figure out what are those things for your business. People make this comparison all the time. It's like, I'm not going to hire a paid media agency because I have a media manager at my company, or I'm not going to hire someone to help us create testimonials because I have a product. I pay a product marketer. They can do that. I'm not going to hire a go-to-market consulting firm. We have a RevOps team. They produce data. And those excuses just don't make sense, because the blend of talent between internal and external is actually the solution, because both of them provide unique, differentiated things. Internal teams understand the company. They understand the politics inside the company. They understand the strategy and the market at a level that an external person never would. But an external person has an understanding of the 200 companies that have already done it, the things that worked and things that didn't work, what success looks like, why these projects fail, how to keep them on track. And there's those types of elements don't get replicated for companies like when they try to do it themselves. Like if you think about the Salesforce object or building like a testimonial engine or trying to figure out how to get AI to produce you 500 blogs, or have your RevOps team try to create infrastructure across the thing, from an internal perspective, it's really like a product development project. You're reinventing the wheel every time. Your team does not have an existing framework. There is no roadmap of where you're going. It's just doing a bunch of random shit, building to some destination that you don't even really know. And so having an external firm that knows what the roadmap is, what the destination is, how to get there, and where the watchouts are, where you're going to take a wrong turn and they're going to help you take a right turn, all of those are reasons why to have a external firm for whatever you're charging, $5,000 a month or whatever. I don't know your pricing, but let's just say $5,000 a month or $1,000 per testimonial or whatever, compared to the $7.5 million a year that they spend on people on their marketing team. It's just an insignificant expense to make something that's a priority happen on time and happen in the right way. And so you could re-listen to that clip and try and figure out how to use that for your own company. But those are the ways to communicate it. One, develop something that is differentiated that can't be replicated in-house. Communicate that a blend of internal and external talent is the actual solution for the reasons that I listed. And that the value here is that you accelerate time to impact and the probability of success of this initiative.
Incredibly helpful, Chris. Thank you.
Happy to help. Great question. Something that I'm working on too. So it's relevant.
That was money. Great stuff. Awesome to see you, Sam. Cool. We got some more. Let's go to Mason. Mason asked a question related to SEO, actually. So Mason, if you want to jump on and ask your question.
Yeah. Hey, you guys. I'm just curious to know, how do you kind of balance the integration between more of this organically sourced content, through like conversation and interviews with, prospects and doing podcasts and having that whole content sort of cycle flowing versus more traditional, maybe bottom of funnel performance based, like stereotypical performance marketing for SEO? Like, how are those strategies intertwined, if at all?
So I'm actually working on an experiment right now. I'm going to have the first release by the end of this week, where I'm taking all of the audio transcripts that I've done over the past 5 years, loading them into a custom GPT, asking it, what questions has Chris been asked across this entire thing? It pulls out all the questions and then writes an SEO optimized blog against that exact question. And so that's something that I'm working on that basically takes this content strategy and then repackages it into a extremely long tail, highly relevant, not a lot of search traffic, but highly relevant, answering the question in a way that you could produce a high volume against a small volume of very relevant traffic. So that it's a hypothesis that I have that could work. I also just have I think it's part data, part intuition, around the high volume sort of like bottom funnel keywords. Like if you look at the Google Ads performance against something, if you sell financial business software or financial planning software, that keyword is typically not a money keyword for you when it comes to ROI and Google Ads. Non-branded terms are just very hard to make the math work around the cost per click, the conversion to an MQL or conversion to a form fill, and then it being actually a qualified person because a lot of garbage comes through Google and those types of searches, then actually them sitting on a meeting, then them getting past the sales, then them closing, all those different filters where you lose people. It's just the math doesn't work in most cases for those types of terms. And so having a SEO strategy against those terms could be a good idea, but an alternative way could be to, instead of hoping the customer searches financial planning software, that they search Vena Solutions, or they search Anaplan, or they search for your brand name, and using this type of content methodology to be able to, and a paid advertising strategy to get in front of people with your message so that when they come back to Google, instead of them searching and not knowing about you financial planning software, they search for your company name, land on your homepage, consume your whole message. And then it's about the performance of your website and the ability for you to message. And so I'm not advocating that companies should completely abandon like high volume, lower funnel SEO. But I do think that we need to challenge the relative importance across the whole strategy, in terms of where Google search, specifically paid and organic combined, and the investment between those two things, where that falls in the overall spectrum in terms of the amount of investment and then the perceived ROI of that channel, Google has it's the most incredible business model ever. They get last touch attribution of anything that passes through. And then they've hidden most of the keywords in SSL lock so that you don't even know whether they search for a long tail term, financial planning software, or your brand anymore. And they just are able to, through that type of attribution that HubSpot collects or any other thing, just consistently pretend about or overinflate the impact that comes from Google because people pass through there to get to your website before they convert, even though so many other things have happened before they actually go to Google that often are untracked. And so what I'm leaning into specifically is focusing on people searching for my brand name, for people that are getting linked out from social. They see my post, they click on my profile, they click on my company, they click visit website, they go to the website on mobile. So optimizing against that. And then long tail specific questions that I'm able to produce at a high volume that I know people are already asking. How do I reforecast for my H2? What are the watchouts that I should do for this? Basically anything that people have asked me before. I could put your question, this answer, and all the other things that I've said and write a educational, informative blog around this exact topic. That's something that's experimental. I wouldn't recommend, I would say at this point, just let me get to I'm almost at the end of it. I've been working on it for a couple months. So just let me get to the end of it and see if it actually produces high quality stuff or not. But that's how I think about like SEO broadly and how you can use this type of content to at least play in a Google search environment, but maybe in a different way than what the traditional strategy is.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Appreciate it.
I'm not an SEO expert, but one thing I would say just real quick on that too is like the value of expertise based content right now is, I think it's the lowest it will be over the next 5-10 years. Like it's going to be the number one most important thing, I believe, because like just with general purpose AI prompting, like everybody's got access to the tool. So if you're not, using expertise, credibility building, trust building content from somebody who's got domain expertise in the area, it's just going to be too easy for anybody else to replicate that content. So Chris has got like, I'm excited to see this experiment because like you've got 500 episodes, worth of material to then draw upon. So really the value is in the library of content and then the repurposing of that. So that's just, my 2 cents on that real quick. Let's pull up Reginald. Reginald had a question based on, his early stage AI startup.
Yeah, sure. Well, first, let me just say, nice to meet you, Chris.
Good to meet you too.
Fan. I've been following your content for years now. I wanted to ask you, so I'm a marketing manager at an early stage SaaS AI startup. Basically, we help companies build, test, and ship generative AI applications. So I started a month and a half ago, and the marketing strategies, of course, demand generation, and we have the demand creation programs. And as part of the demand capture programs, I have these early customer profiles, and I'd like to run LinkedIn ads to like a list of named accounts as part of like an ABM strategy. I just wanted to know whether you have any advice for marketing and sales alignment there, specifically when it comes to sales stepping in and engaging with accounts, because I'm a bit concerned that like, for example, as like accounts, for example, interact and show intent, for example, by spending a lot of time on our pricing pages and certain high intent pages that the sales team automatically wants to step in when in fact those accounts might not be in the buying cycle.
Couple like background questions before I answer this. How many people work at the company?
So the entire company, 18 go-to-market team, it's 2 sales, so 2 SDRs, and myself in marketing.
Cool. So around a 20-person company. I think that's important context for everyone as I like give this answer. And then about how many customers do you have? You don't have to reveal anything confidential, but like, is it 10? Is it hundreds? How many customers?
So less than 50.
Okay. And then what exactly are you offering? Is it consulting about how to build AI? Is it a platform that helps you, has AI and helps you build custom automation? Like,
yeah, so it's a platform that helps you build like an LLM powered system. So it has like, for example, prompt management tooling, deployment tooling. So it basically is the tools that helps you build that AI product.
And then who's going to buy it? Who's the persona inside of the company that would buy this?
So in terms of companies, I'm looking at SaaS companies. That's an early customer profile. SaaS, we have AI startups, and we also have consultancies. So you could think data transformation or IT transformation consultancies. And the personas would be, generally speaking, CTOs or, CTOs. Those would be like the champion persona, and the main users would be, well, the back-end engineers. But the champion, the person who really wants the product, would be the CTOs or even the CPOs, Chief Product Officer.
And then how big is your list? How many accounts?
So let's see. I'm looking at adopting a one-to-many approach. So I'm thinking for SaaS and for agencies, about 100.
100 accounts total?
Yeah, well, in the hundreds.
Yeah, not the thousands is what you're saying.
No.
Okay. Yeah. So like to me, one to many, you could do a campaign one to many to 100 accounts. You could do one to many to 1 million accounts. Like you can decide based on your TAM, your price, your customer acquisition cost. But I think given your stage, it should be less than 1,000. Just because of budget constraints, and then demonstrating that these things influence the impact against a small subset of accounts. If you run these ads for 6 months and none of the 1,000 accounts are in your pipeline in January, you know that it's not doing something. You could argue that, but they're now aware of our company and it could pay off in 3 years. But the reality at your startup is that you need to deploy money to create pipeline and revenue now, not 3 years into the future. If you wait for your pipeline to show up 3 years in the future, you're going to be out of business, right? So create basically a holdout group, create a group that you're going to market to that you think is the best opportunity. Run those. I think that at 1,000 accounts, you don't need a lot of budget. I don't think that you should be spending a lot, 2,000, 5,000, around that range to hit those accounts and the people inside of those accounts. Play around with the content and creative, take key messages off of your website, make it into a graphic formatted for LinkedIn, run a marketing message, take a customer story or a quote or a testimonial or something like that you have, run social proof against it. If you did, in combination with this, I would create a webinar strategy for CTOs where you're talking to a customer that implemented it and they're talking through their process of how they did it. Then you could have some type of a long form with a customer that then you could cut short form for the media, but you also now have a long form that can be used in your website, for YouTube, for email, to go out through email, places like that. And I would put those two strategies together. So just key topics here. Small account list is a holdout group that you can measure purely based on the account. Forget attribution. It doesn't matter whether they clicked and converted and you have UTMs on it, whether they came back, you have these set of accounts. 6 months later, probably 6 months later for you, are they in pipeline or not? How many? I love named account lists for that reason, is that you don't really have to think about attribution very much. Are the accounts in pipeline or not? And then a mix of creative, but mostly things that are talking about your product, not at this stage, not thought leadership. You're like, if you have something that really your CEO posted that really worked, like you can think about running a thought leader ad, but having your whole strategy at this stage around thought leadership it's just not the right time for that. So focus on your product, focus on customers that have been successful, focus on use cases or examples of how people have used it so that people can understand what the solution is more quickly. And I would focus my investments there.
Great. And maybe just in terms of marketing and sales alignment, when do you think would be a good opportunity for sales to step in and engage with accounts?
I get these questions a lot from marketers, and having spent a lot more time recently working with CFOs and chief revenue officers, I think it's whenever sales decides is the right time. And ideally, we have data to back it. But the philosophical thing from marketing of, sales shouldn't reach out because they were on our pricing page, that person's not ready yet. A well-crafted sales message can take someone that is not ready yet and get them into a meeting and convince them this is a priority. And so it's really about the intent of the action. Yeah, spamming someone from an SDR that's on your pricing page with automation saying, hey, do you want a demo, is not the way to do it. But saying, hey, being able to cut up a customer story about what a CTO said about how they used your product, cut that into it, have an SDR do it on their own, take a 2-minute clip of the video, put it into an email, link to it, have that be tracked, send it to somebody that's at the company that was on your pricing page, and use that as the outreach of saying, hey, realize you were like this company. Here's what they said about using our product. Let me know if you're interested in talking through it in another 15 minutes, or let me know if you're interested in me introducing you to the CTO there that could talk to you about how you're using it, and have a different method of outreach that just says, instead of, hey, come get a demo, and try and think about other ways to get people. I love the reference play. It worked really well back in the day in medical technology, where the outbound was not, hey, do you want to have a meeting next Tuesday? It was, hey, do you want me to introduce you to blah, blah, blah person that works at a hospital that's in your area that's used our product for 3 years and had a lot of success with it? And that becomes the first sales touch. And so to me, it's not really about, is this person ready from a marketing perspective? It's changing the intent of the sales action based on the readiness of the buyer.
Got it. Amazing. Thank you so much, Chris. Very insightful. And yeah, super insightful. I don't want to put you on a pedestal, but to me, everything you say is like golden.
Appreciate you, man. I've been around the block many times and happy to help fast track what you're working on. Yeah, I'll also say that if the data is in place, that like it should be a black and white conversation of whether or not sales should be reaching out, and not based on whether we think the prospect is ready or not, but based on sales performance. Like if SDRs are reaching out to 1,000 people and getting no meetings, then it's clear that either what they're saying really sucks, or they're not saying the right thing, but more than likely this person isn't ready based on data. And so ideally shifting from the philosophical, this person didn't ask for a demo, so sales shouldn't reach out yet, and focus a lot more on, okay, sales, you go do your thing. We're going to track the data and then let the data tell us whether we should keep doing this or not. I think that shift would be really helpful for companies and marketers.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, this was money. Awesome. Thank you everybody for joining today. We were testing. So today was a test. Basically, Chris and I are going to do these monthly. Today was AMA, try to kind of go through rapid fire, jump around a little bit. Hopefully there was value here. But yeah, Chris, this was fun, man. I'm really excited. I didn't know you were doing that with your library of content. You had shared that with me a little bit ago. You were kind of thinking about it, but it's cool to see like you've taken some steps to kind of execute on it. And I'm curious to see how that plays out on the written side.
Yeah, we've been working on it for 2 months, and I think we're on V6. Like we've swung and missed quite a few times, or like not gotten it to where we think it needs to be. So changing the prompts, changing how the library is created. Hopefully we can find something that people can repeat. And I have it has the potential to be the new create video content for social.
Yep.
The next extension. Before it was like, okay, put it on YouTube. This could be the next extension. Build an AI engine, run it through AI, create long tail written content based on what you've already said in real life. So we'll see.
Maybe on the next session we can kind of see what any learnings are from that one.
Yeah, we'll let's go through that, because we'll definitely have stuff available by then.
Awesome. We'll let everybody get out of here. Thanks again for your time. We'll catch you on the next one.
Catch y'all soon. Thanks everyone for being here.